Trump tariff dividend came out this week, the announcement that Trump is committed to a $2,000 tariff dividend payment for many Americans. And I've been talking about my problem with the tariffs from the beginning. I'm anti-tariff. I'm anti-protectionist. I'm very big actual free markets, free trade, not trade that's basically ran through centralized decisions and government setting quotas and government setting the deals. If you want free trade, you have free trade. The tariffs are a protectionist measure, supposedly to protect the American industry that doesn't exist. That's long gone. But this is Trump's attempt to bring that back, and he's using emergency economic powers to try to implement these tariffs. Now, the power to tariff, to raise revenue, to raise taxes, that lies with the legislative branch. Trump is trying to usurp these powers by declaring an economic emergency. That's how he's imposed these tariffs. I say that's unconstitutional. The power to tariff lies with the legislature. And everybody that wants to defend this, please think these things through. There's second and third order effects to what you're supporting. Okay, you support Donald Trump doing this because you think it's protecting American industry. Well, let's fast forward a few years and just think. We have a radical Democratic regime in. They believe that climate change is the greatest, emergency that we're facing. So they say, because climate change is an emergency, we're going to put taxes on meat consumption, on fossil fuel usage. They're going to use what you're doing now to set the precedent of being able to implement taxes, because that's what tariffs are. They're going to say, well, Donald Trump used this executive authority to implement tariffs, and we're going to use this executive authority in an emergency to tax whatever we determine is an emergency. So before you support this, think about what you're potentially opening the door for. These are unconstitutional tariffs. And hopefully when the Supreme Court reviews these tariffs, the Supreme Court shuts them down. Now, see, I think Donald Trump knows that the Supreme Court is going to shut them down. And he's trying to set the stage for when the tariffs are shut down, he can blame the Supreme Court for the economic problems that are going to ensue. Now I think we're going into an economic downturn. I think we're in the middle of one. I think it's going to get worse. And I think what Donald Trump is doing is kind of hedging himself. See, when things get bad, if the Supreme Court shuts down these tariffs, Donald Trump will be able to say, oh, well, if the Supreme Court had just let my tariffs go through, everything would be fine. We wouldn't be in this position. He's already kind of done that too with the Fed. See, the Federal Reserve, in my opinion, never raised rates high enough, and they started cutting rates too soon. But Donald Trump says, too late, pal. That's what he was calling Jerome Powell. He says, too late, pal, started cutting rates too late. So he's already kind of hedged himself using the Fed as a scapegoat, because if there's economic problems, he'll say, oh, well, the Fed cut rates too late. It's the Fed's fault. It's not my fault. It's the Fed's fault. I was trying to push for lower rates sooner, even though inflation's still at 3% officially, probably more like 6%. But Donald Trump's been out saying that inflation's dead, saying that the price of Thanksgiving meal hasn't gone up. People are crazy. It's the same gaslighting that the Biden administration did. The Biden administration for several years said, what are the people talking about? The economy's great. And Donald Trump's kind of doing the same thing. If the people are feeling it, people going to the grocery store, I feel it. When I go to the grocery store, I go in for a routine trip now. I can't get out of the store for less than $100. And that's just to pick up a few items. But according to Donald Trump, everything's great and inflation is non-existent. And see, he's saying he's doing this $2,000 tariff dividend, basically trying to buy support. Now they're saying Scott Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury, from the George Soros camp. Scott Besson has said, we're not necessarily going to do $2,000 direct checks to people. This might come in the form of a tax, like a tax incentive, something that somebody can get a tax deduction on their taxes when they file next year. And supposedly this is only for the lower income households. I think any household making less than $100,000. And I crunched some rough numbers earlier, but so last month the tariff revenue was approximately $30 billion. So annualize that out, we'll call it approximately $360 billion a year in tariff revenue. And just to go on the like we'll go ahead and say $400 billion a year in tariff revenue. Okay? So $400 billion in tariff revenue, and if you give these tariff dividends to people, that's going to come out to approximately $160 billion in tariff dividend payments. So that takes your tariff revenue down, to about 200, we'll call it 250 billion. Well, our deficit this year was 1.75 trillion. So that's still a huge deficit. I don't understand where the Trump administration is getting these crazy numbers from. Yes, there's trillions of dollars in tariff revenue when you look at the projections over a decade, but we're running trillion-dollar deficits every year. So the tariff math does not add up. And Trump is relying on these as though they're going to save the United States economy. And that's not accurate. And he needs to quit lying because it's pissing people off and he's losing all of his support. And the Republicans are just paving the way for some radical socialists to come in. They're going about it all wrong. That's how Mom Dami is the mayor of New York. This guy's a socialist Marxist, but they never, ever, or maybe they did, but primarily what they focused on trying to attack this guy was that he was Islamic and that they thought he was anti-Israel. I was watching some clips earlier this week of a debate that Mom Dami was in with these other New York City mayoral candidates. And one of the questions in the debate was, as the mayor, where would you go? Which foreign country would you visit? And all these people running for mayor of New York are talking about wanting to take a trip to Israel. I would go to Israel. And Mom Dami says, I wouldn't go to anywhere. I would go out into the city of New York and speak with my constituents. And because I guess he felt the pressure of all the, Israeli answers, he says, and I would, I would go out and talk to my Jewish constituents and I would meet them where they are within my city and see what their needs were. I mean, you talk about knocking it out of the park. And then they attacked him. They're like, what do you mean? You wouldn't go to Israel? What? And they started pressuring him. That's the right answer, dude. The guy's talking about he doesn't really care. And I don't get it either. There is no place for foreign policy within a city government. That's not, I guess you could make this, there's probably the argument on the right. Well, that's, New York City is the financial hub of the world. And of course it's important. Whatever. His concern should be the citizens of New York City, and that's it. But that's exactly what we're doing. That's exactly what the Trump administration is doing. If you want to end up with a Marxist in the White House in 2028, just keep supporting Donald Trump. And I keep thinking, libertarians, listen to me, Libertarian Party, pick a candidate early. Pick a candidate for the 2028 election, right now. Because no one knows who libertarians are. Nobody knows what libertarianism is all about. And I think right now, you can make a really good sales pitch for why a Libertarian Party candidate is the right choice, because the Republicans and Democrats are absolute trash. Now, that would also require a lot of Americans putting in a little time and a little bit of, you know, a little bit of effort into understanding what's going on, not just watching Fox News and CNN and listening to what they're saying is going on. How about we understand what our country is about, the constitutional principles? You know, most people, I keep hearing people say, "Oh, our country's not a democracy." Okay, it's a constitutional republic. There's democratic principles that go into it, being allowed to vote for your representatives. This is not a democracy. Democracy is, 51 to 49, mob rules. Basically the majority gets to rule over the minority. The majority gets to rule over the minority. That's not what we are. That's why we have the separations of powers. That's why you have the Congress, the Senate. You've got the executive branch. If it was just a democracy, we would just have one body that would just vote, and it would be 51 to 49, and that's it. So we're not a democracy, and people need to quit repeating that. They've just heard that their whole lives, so they just repeat it because they don't know any better.